The hotel room was still decorated for celebration when they found her. White roses scattered across silk sheets, champagne cooling in a silver bucket, the remnants of what should have been the beginning of forever. But Amina wasn't sleeping. She would never wake up. 21 years old, dressed in the ivory gown she'd chosen with trembling hands just days before, lying motionless on the floor of a luxury suite overlooking the glittering sprawl of Dubai. The city that promised her everything had delivered only silence. Her wedding night had become her last night, and somewhere in the building below, her husband was already gone. But to understand how Amina ended up here, in this room that smelled of expensive perfume and something darker, we need to go back. Back to Casablanca, to the life she lived before a single message changed everything. Amina Ben Ali was ordinary in the way most of us are ordinary, not in lacking worth, but in living a life that felt small against the backdrop of her dreams. She worked 6 days a week in her family's textile shop in the old Medina, a cramped space filled with bolts of fabric in every color imaginable, the air thick with dust and the sound of her father's old sewing machine. Customers haggled in Arabic and French. Her mother wrapped purchases in brown paper tied with string, and Amina stood behind the counter calculating prices on a calculator older than she was, watching life happen in the narrow street beyond the doorway. She was the eldest of 4 children. Responsibility came with that title. While her younger brother attended university and her sisters focused on their studies, Amina's education had ended after secondary school. Not because she wasn't smart enough. The family needed her. Her father's arthritis made threading needles impossible some days. Her mother couldn't manage the shop and the household alone, and someone had to sacrifice. She told herself it was temporary. She told herself she didn't mind. But late at night, scrolling through her phone in the bedroom she shared with her sisters, she minded very much. Her Instagram feed was a window into other worlds. Girls her age in Paris, in London, in Dubai. They posed in front of infinity pools, held cocktails with tiny umbrellas, wore sunglasses that cost more than her monthly earnings. She knew it was curated, filtered, often fake, but knowing didn't stop the wanting. She followed accounts that posted quotes about manifesting your dreams, about the universe rewarding those who believed. She saved photos of places she'd probably never see. She told herself that someday, somehow, her life would expand beyond these familiar walls. Her friends were kind but realistic. Salma worked at a call center and complained about her supervisor. Nadia was engaged to her cousin and planning a modest wedding in 6 months. Yasmin had 3 children under 5 and looked exhausted every time they met for tea. They loved Amina, but they'd also accepted their circumstances in a way she couldn't quite manage. When she talked about wanting more, wanting different, they'd smile and say she was a dreamer. It wasn't an insult, but it wasn't quite a compliment either. Amina wasn't looking for rescue. She wants that understood, even now. She had plans, vague and half-formed as they were. She'd been saving money, a few dirhams at a time, hidden in an envelope under her mattress. Maybe she'd take a course in graphic design. Maybe she'd apply for work at one of the new hotels in the city center. Maybe she'd meet someone who saw her as more than just dependable Amina, responsible Amina, Amina who always put everyone else first. Then one evening in March, as she sat in the shop waiting for her father to finish with a customer, her phone buzzed with a notification. A message request on Instagram from someone she didn't know. She almost ignored it. Her account was private. She was careful about accepting strangers. But something made her click. The profile belonged to Khalid Mansouri, 34 years old according to the bio, based in Dubai. The photos showed a man in expensive casual clothes, the kind of effortless style that spoke of money. There he was in front of a Range Rover, its black paint gleaming. Another photo showed him at a rooftop restaurant, the Burj Khalifa rising behind him like a needle piercing the sky. Business meetings in glass conference rooms. A watch that caught the light just so. But it was his smile that made her pause. Warm, genuine, the kind that reached his eyes. He looked kind. He looked real. The message was simple. I hope this doesn't seem strange, but I saw your photo through Nadia Idrissi's account, and I had to reach out. There's something about your smile that made me stop scrolling. I'm Khalid. I'd love to know more about the person behind that beautiful smile. Nadia Idrissi. Amina scrolled through her followers and found her, a girl she'd gone to school with years ago, someone she barely remembered. The connection was thin, but it existed. Not a complete stranger then. That mattered. She stared at the message for a long time. Her mother called her name from the back of the shop. A customer needed help. She slipped her phone into her pocket and didn't reply until much later that night, after dinner was cleaned up and her sisters were asleep and the house was finally quiet. Thank you for the kind words, she typed. deleting and retyping 3 times before settling on something that felt right. I'm Amina. I'm curious how you came across Nadia's page. His reply came quickly, as if he'd been waiting. I was looking at photos from Casablanca. I'm originally from Rabat, but I've been in Dubai for 8 years now. Sometimes I miss home, and I like seeing familiar places. Your city is beautiful, but not as beautiful as you, if you'll forgive me being forward. They talked for hours that first night. He asked about her family, her work, what she did for fun. He told her about his business, import and export, he said, mostly textiles and luxury goods. He had clients across the Emirates and North Africa. He traveled constantly. It was exciting, but lonely. He'd been married once, briefly, when he was young and stupid. No children, no drama, just 2 people who wanted different things. He'd focused on building his company ever since, but lately he'd been thinking about what he was building it for. A big apartment was just empty space if you had no one to share it with. Amina found herself telling him things she rarely shared. About feeling stuck, about loving her family, but sometimes resenting the weight of their needs. About scrolling through other people's lives and feeling like she was watching a movie she'd never get the star in. He listened. He didn't try to fix her or tell her she should be grateful for what she had. He just said he understood. That everyone deserves to want more. That there was nothing wrong with dreaming. Over the following weeks, their conversations became the best part of her day. She'd wake up to good morning messages, photos of the sunrise over Dubai Marina with captions like, "Wish you could see this in person." He'd check in during her lunch break, ask how her day was going, remember small details she'd mentioned days before. When her sister was sick, he asked after her the next day. When her father's arthritis flared up badly, Khalid sent a thoughtful message about a specialist he'd heard about in Casablanca, even offering to help with costs if money was an issue. He video called her for the first time in April. She almost didn't answer, suddenly self-conscious about her appearance, about the cramped bedroom behind her, about everything. But his face on the screen was exactly like his photos, maybe even more handsome in motion. He was in his apartment, floor-to-ceiling windows showing the city lights behind him. He asked if he could see her face, said he'd been imagining what her voice sounded like. When she finally turned on her camera, his expression softened. "Even more beautiful than your pictures," he said quietly. "Amina, I think I'm in trouble here." They talked for 2 hours. He showed her around his apartment, the modern kitchen he never cooked in, the second bedroom he used as an office, the view from his balcony. It looked like something from a magazine. She showed him her world too, the small room with its faded wallpaper, her sisters sleeping in the next bed. He didn't seem bothered by the contrast. He said what mattered was the person, not the place. He said he'd grown up in a house smaller than her family's shop, that he remembered what it felt like to want escape, to crave possibility. Her friends noticed the change in her. She smiled at her phone constantly. She stayed up late whispering into video calls. Salma asked who he was, and Amina showed her his profile. "He's too good to be true," Salma said, not unkindly. "Men like that don't just message random girls from Instagram." But Amina bristled at the word random, at the implication that she wasn't worthy of someone successful and kind. Why couldn't it be real? Why couldn't good things happen to her? Khalid sent her gifts, a new phone first, because he said he wanted their video calls to be clearer. He wanted to see her better. She tried to refuse, but he insisted, said he had more money than he knew what to do with, and it made him happy to make her happy. Then a designer handbag her mother eyed suspiciously, perfume that cost more than a week's earnings from the shop. He said he was courting her properly, the way a woman like her deserved. In May, 2 months after that first message, he told her he was falling in love with her. They were on a video call, late at night in Casablanca, early evening in Dubai. He looked nervous, running his hand through his hair the way he did when he was thinking hard about something. "I know this is fast," he said. "I know we haven't met in person yet. But Amina, I think about you constantly. I think about what life could be like if you were here. I want to take care of you. I want to give you everything you've been dreaming about. I want to be the person who makes those dreams real." Her heart was racing so hard she could hear it. "Khalid, I want to marry you," he said, the words tumbling out. "I want you to come to Dubai. I want to build a life with you. I know it's a lot to ask. I know your family needs you. But Amina, you deserve to be more than just the daughter who sacrifices everything. You deserve your own life, and I want to share mine with you." She should have asked more questions. She should have slowed down, thought it through, talked to her family before giving any kind of answer. But in that moment, staring at the face of a man who saw her, really saw her, who promised her everything she'd been aching for, caution felt like cowardice. "Yes," she whispered. Yes, I want that too. The preparations happened quickly. Khalid said there was no point waiting when they both knew what they wanted. He handled the paperwork, navigating the complicated process of international marriage documentation. He needed her passport, her birth certificate, various forms signed and notarized. He'd send her documents. She'd take them to the appropriate offices in Casablanca, scan the results, send them back. It felt bureaucratic and unromantic, but he promised that once she arrived, they'd have a beautiful celebration. Just the two of them at first, and then later they'd visit Morocco together and have a proper reception for her family. Her mother asked questions Amina couldn't fully answer. What exactly does he do? Why haven't we met him, even on video? Why is everything happening so fast? Her father was quieter, but she could see the concern in his eyes. Her cousin Sarah was the most vocal. "This doesn't feel right," she said one afternoon, helping Amina shop for clothes to bring to Dubai. "You've never met him in person. You don't know his family. You don't know anything about his life except what he's told you." But Amina was defensive, interpreting caution as jealousy, concern as an attempt to keep her small and stuck. "You don't understand," she said. "He loves me. He wants to give me a real life. Why can't you just be happy for me?" Sarah grabbed her hand. "I am happy if you're happy. I'm just scared. Promise me you'll be careful. Promise me you'll call the second something feels wrong." Amina promised, but she didn't think she'd need to. Wrong was her old life. Endless days in the shop, dreams deferred indefinitely. Right was Khalid, was Dubai, was finally becoming the person she was meant to be. The wedding was set for June 23rd. She'd fly to Dubai on the 22nd. They'd marry the following day in a small ceremony. Just them and 2 witnesses as required by law. Khalid apologized for the simplicity but said his family situation was complicated, that he'd been estranged from them for years over his first marriage. It was better this way, he said, intimate, focused on just the 2 of them starting their new life together. On June 21st, Amina's last night in Casablanca, her mother helped her pack. The suitcase was nicer than anything she'd ever owned, another gift from Khalid. Her mother folded clothes in silence for a long time before finally speaking. "It's not too late to wait. To visit first, maybe. To meet him, see his life, make sure everything is as he says before you marry him." "Mama, I love him. You love the idea of him. You love what he represents. Those aren't the same as loving a person." Her mother's hands were shaking slightly as she placed Amina's favorite scarf in the suitcase. "I just want you to be safe. I want you to be sure." Amina hugged her mother, breathed in the familiar scent of rose water and cooking spices and home. "I am sure," she said. "I've never been more sure of anything." That was the last real conversation she had with her mother. The next morning she boarded a plane to Dubai, her phone full of encouraging messages from Khalid, her heart full of hope that felt, in that moment, like certainty. She watched Casablanca disappear beneath the clouds and thought she was watching her old life fade away. She had no idea she was watching her last chance to turn back disappear with it. Dubai hit Amina like a wall of heat and light when she stepped off the plane. The airport was massive, gleaming, filled with people from everywhere speaking languages she couldn't identify. She'd never seen so much marble, so much glass, so many designer stores crammed into one building. She felt small and overwhelmed and excited all at once, pulling her suitcase through the crowds, scanning faces for the one she'd only seen on screens. Khalid was waiting outside customs, holding a bouquet of white roses. He looked exactly like his photos, but different too, more solid, more real. When he saw her, his face broke into that smile she'd memorized, and he walked quickly toward her. "Amina," he said, and his voice had the same warmth it carried through phone speakers, but fuller, somehow, richer. He wrapped her in a hug that smelled like expensive cologne and felt both familiar and strange. "You're here. You're actually here." She laughed, felt tears in her eyes, couldn't quite believe this was happening. "I'm here." The drive from the airport was like moving through a dream. Khalid held her hand, pointed out landmarks as they passed. The Burj Khalifa rising impossibly tall against the blue sky, the Palm Jumeirah stretching into the Gulf like a perfectly geometric miracle. Construction cranes everywhere, the city constantly building itself higher, bigger, more extravagant. He talked about restaurants he wanted to take her to, beaches they'd visit, a life they'd build together. She watched the city blur past and tried to absorb it all, tried to match the reality to the images she'd studied for months. His apartment was in Dubai Marina, a tower of glass and steel that made her neck ache to look up at. The lobby had a chandelier the size of her bedroom back home. A doorman in a crisp uniform greeted Khalid by name, nodded politely at Amina. The elevator was mirrored on all sides, reflecting her tired face, her modest traveling clothes, her uncertainty multiplied into infinity. The apartment itself was beautiful, exactly as he'd shown her, but more impressive in person. Modern furniture in whites and grays, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the marina, boats bobbing in water so blue it looked artificial. A kitchen with appliances she didn't recognize. 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, space that felt excessive for one person, perfect for 2 starting fresh. Khalid gave her a tour, showed her the closet he'd cleared out for her clothes, the bathroom stocked with products he thought she might like. "I want you to feel at home here," he said. "This is your space now too. Our space." She wanted to feel the joy she'd imagined feeling. Instead, she felt dislocated, like she was watching herself in someone else's life. Jet lag probably. Overwhelm. She smiled and thanked him and let him show her how the shower worked, where the towels were kept, which drawer held the silverware. That first evening, they ordered food from a Lebanese restaurant, ate on the balcony watching the sunset paint the marina in shades of orange and pink. Khalid was attentive, asking if she was tired, if she needed anything, if the food was okay. His phone rang constantly, but he'd silence it, apologize, say work never stopped, but he'd handle it later. She noticed he always took the calls in the other room though, closing the door, speaking in rapid Arabic she couldn't quite follow through the walls. The next day was a blur of activity. They had an appointment at the marriage office, paperwork to finalize, witnesses to meet. Khalid had hired 2 men she'd never seen before, employees he said, people who owed him favors. They signed their names on forms, shook her hand with formal politeness, left immediately after. The ceremony itself was quick, administrative, nothing like the wedding she'd attended in Casablanca with their music and celebration and whole communities bearing witness. But Khalid said they'd have a proper party later. That for now, this was just making it official, making it legal for her to stay, to build a life here. She signed papers she barely read. Her Arabic was good, but the legal language was dense, and Khalid kept assuring her it was standard, just documentation of their marriage, her residency status, the normal bureaucracy of international unions. She wanted to read more carefully, but he was rushing her, saying they had limited time, the office would close, they needed to finish before the weekend. So she signed, and signed, and signed. When they left the building, she was legally Amina Mansouri, a wife, a resident of the United Arab Emirates, a woman who'd left everything familiar for a man she'd known in person for less than 24 hours. The wedding celebration he'd planned was that evening at the Atlantis Hotel on the Palm. He'd booked a suite overlooking the Arabian Gulf, arranged for dinner to be delivered, bought her a dress that must have cost thousands of dirhams. It was ivory, elegant, more sophisticated than anything she'd ever worn. She put it on in the hotel bathroom, stared at herself in the mirror, tried to recognize the woman looking back. Khalid knocked softly. "Can I see?" She opened the door, and his expression was unreadable for a moment, something flickering across his face too quick to name. Then he smiled. "Perfect," he said. "You look perfect." But something in his tone felt off, felt distant. She tried to shake the feeling. This was her wedding night. This was supposed to be the beginning of everything she'd dreamed about. The suite was extravagant. Roses everywhere, petals scattered across the bed, champagne on ice, chocolate-covered strawberries arranged artfully on a silver platter. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed the gulf stretching dark and endless under the emerging stars. It should have been romantic. It should have felt like a fairy tale. Khalid poured champagne, handed her a glass. She'd never really drunk alcohol before. Her family was observant enough that it wasn't part of their life. But tonight felt like it called for new experiences, for shedding old restrictions. She took a sip, felt the bubbles sharp on her tongue. They toasted to their future, to new beginnings, to love that crossed borders and built bridges. But Khalid kept checking his phone, kept stepping away to the balcony, kept leaving her alone in the beautiful room with her champagne and her growing unease. "Is everything all right?" she asked when he came back inside after the 3rd call. "Fine. Just work. A shipment that was supposed to arrive tomorrow got delayed. Nothing for you to worry about." He kissed her forehead, distracted. "I'm sorry. I know this isn't how tonight should be." She wanted to ask more questions but didn't know how. Wanted to say that she'd expected more from this night, more attention, more presence, more of the man who'd been so focused on her for months. But she stayed quiet. Maybe this was normal. Maybe she was being unreasonable, expecting his full attention on a work night, even if it was their wedding night. Dinner arrived, elaborate and expensive, but neither of them ate much. The conversation felt stilted, forced. Khalid seemed preoccupied, checking his watch, glancing at his phone even when it wasn't ringing. Amina tried to resurrect the easy flow they'd had over video calls, but in person the silences felt heavier, harder to fill. Around 10, he said he needed to make a quick work call, would be just a few minutes. She watched him go out to the balcony again, watched him pace while he talked, his free hand gesturing emphatically. The call stretched to 20 minutes, then 30. She wandered around the suite, touched the rose petals, looked out at the city lights, felt increasingly like a guest in someone else's celebration. When he came back inside, his expression was tense. "I need to step out for an hour, maybe two. I'm sorry. I know the timing is terrible, but this is important, a client issue that can't wait. Tonight, on our wedding night, I know, I'm sorry, but this is a major account. If I don't handle this personally, I could lose a contract I've been working on for months. I'll be back as soon as I can. Make yourself comfortable. Order anything you want from room service. Try to get some rest. You must be exhausted still from the travel." He was already grabbing his jacket, already moving toward the door. She felt panic rising in her chest, felt the wrongness of this moment sharp and clear. "Khalid, wait. I'll be quick, I promise." He kissed her quickly, distracted already, his mind somewhere else. "This is important, Amina. Trust me." Then he was gone, and she was alone in a luxury suite, in a city where she knew no one, married to a man who'd just left her on their wedding night to handle business he couldn't explain. She sat on the edge of the enormous bed and tried to think, tried to separate exhaustion and culture shock and disappointment from genuine concern. Maybe this was normal. Maybe she was overreacting. Maybe successful businessmen always had urgent issues that couldn't wait. Maybe she needed to be more understanding, more flexible, more grateful for everything he was providing. But her cousin Sarah's voice echoed in her head. "Promise me you'll call the second. Something feels wrong." She reached for her phone and realized it wasn't where she'd left it. She checked her purse, the bathroom counter, the table by the window. Not there. She went through her suitcase thinking maybe she'd packed it by accident. Nothing. Her heart started beating faster. She'd had it at the marriage office, she was certain. She'd taken a photo of the certificate, sent it to her mother. After that, the day was a blur of the new apartment, getting ready, coming here. She looked around the suite more carefully now. Her suitcase was there, but it had been moved. She'd left it by the closet, and now it was near the door. The contents looked subtly disturbed, like someone had searched through them. Her passport was missing. She always kept it in the interior zippered pocket. It wasn't there now. Cold fear started seeping through the confusion. She went to the suite door, tried the handle, locked, but not with the simple hotel lock. Something else, something external. She could turn the handle, but the door wouldn't open. She was locked in. Now the panic came fully, sharp and undeniable. She pounded on the door, called for help, but the suite was at the end of a long hallway and the hotel had excellent soundproofing. No one came. She tried the balcony, but they were 15 floors up, nothing but a sheer drop to the manicured gardens below. She needed her phone. She needed to call someone, anyone. She searched the entire suite systematically, opening every drawer, checking every surface. It was gone. He'd taken it. When she wasn't looking, when she was in the bathroom getting ready or distracted by the view, he'd gone through her things and taken her phone and her passport and locked her in. The champagne glasses sat on the table, 2 poured, only hers touched. The strawberries untouched. The rose petals suddenly sinister, like a stage set designed to convince her everything was romantic and normal while something else was happening beneath the surface. She tried to think clearly through the fear. Why would he do this? What was happening? Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe she was missing something obvious. But the locked door didn't lie. The missing documents didn't lie. The man who'd courted her so carefully had trapped her, and she had no idea why. Hours passed. She tried the door periodically, hoping the lock was somehow temporary, somehow a mistake. It never opened. She tried screaming from the balcony, but the wind carried her voice away, and the guests in nearby rooms had their own balconies facing different directions. No one heard. No one came. Around 2 in the morning, she heard voices outside the suite, male voices, speaking Arabic too rapidly for her to follow. She ran to the door, pressed her ear against it. 3 men, maybe 4. One of them was definitely Khalid. They were arguing about something, about timing, about payment, about complications. Then she heard a word that made her blood freeze. Merchandise. They were calling someone merchandise, talking about delivery schedules and buyers and markets. She backed away from the door, her mind finally accepting what she'd been trying not to understand. This wasn't a marriage. This was something else entirely. She'd been lured here, documented here, isolated here, for a purpose that had nothing to do with love. The door unlocked. She heard the mechanism click. She looked around frantically for something to use as a weapon, grabbed a champagne bottle by the neck. The door opened and Khalid walked in, followed by two men she'd never seen. They were big, professionally intimidating, the kind of men hired for their capacity for violence. Khalid's face was different now. The warmth was gone, the kindness, the gentleness. What remained was cold assessment, business calculation. "Amina," he said quietly, "I need you to listen very carefully and do exactly what I say." She held the bottle tighter. "What is this? What's happening? You're going to come with us. You're going to be quiet and cooperative. If you do that, things will be easier for you. If you fight, if you scream, things will be much worse. Do you understand?" The room spun. This couldn't be real. This had to be a nightmare, jet lag and exhaustion creating hallucinations. But the men were solid, real, blocking the doorway. And Khalid was looking at her like she was an object, a problem to solve, not a person he promised to love. "You said you loved me," she whispered. Something flickered across his face, almost like regret, but it passed quickly. "I said what I needed to say to get you here. That's how this works. That's how it's always worked." She wanted to ask how many others there had been, how many women he'd lured with pretty words and false promises. But one of the men moved toward her and she did the only thing she could think to do. She ran. The suite was large but finite. She made it to the bedroom, tried to lock that door, but they were faster. The bigger man grabbed her arm, twisted it behind her back. The bottle fell, didn't break, rolled uselessly across the carpet. She screamed then, screamed as loud as she could, and he clamped a hand over her mouth, pulled her backward against his chest. Khalid was on his phone again, angry now. "I told you she'd be compliant. I told you we wouldn't have this problem. She's been perfect for months. Why is she fighting now? Because she understood now. Because the illusion had shattered. Because she'd rather fight and fail than cooperate with whatever they had planned for her." She bit down hard on the hand covering her mouth. The man swore, loosened his grip just enough. She wrenched away, lunged for the balcony, thinking maybe if she could get outside, if she could scream loud enough long enough, someone would hear, someone would help. But there were too many of them and only one of her. Hands grabbed her dress, pulled her back. She stumbled, tried to catch herself, but her heel caught on the edge of the carpet. She was falling. The corner of the coffee table rising up to meet her. A split second of clarity, seeing exactly what was about to happen and being completely unable to stop it. The impact was a sound before it was a feeling. A crack that echoed through the suite. Then pain, sudden and absolute, radiating from her temple. Then nothing, just silence. And roses. And the champagne still bubbling quietly in its bucket. And Amina Benali, who dreamed of something more than the life she was born into, lying impossibly still on the floor of a luxury suite, while the men who'd promised her everything stood frozen, realizing that dead, she was worth nothing at all. The silence after Amina fell lasted exactly 4 seconds. Then Khalid was moving, dropping to his knees beside her, his hands hovering over her body like he was afraid to touch her, afraid to confirm what he already knew. "Amina," he said, his voice strange and tight. "Amina, get up." She didn't move. Blood was pooling beneath her head, dark against the cream carpet, spreading in a shape that looked almost like one of the rose petals scattered across the room. Her eyes were open but empty, staring at nothing. The light gone from them in a way that couldn't be mistaken for anything but permanent. The bigger man, the one who'd grabbed her, was backing away, his hands raised like he could distance himself from what had just happened. "I didn't push her. I didn't do anything. She pulled away. She fell. This isn't on me." The second man was already on his phone, speaking in rapid-fire Arabic to someone on the other end. "We have a problem. A big problem. She's dead." "No, I'm serious." She hit her head. "There's blood everywhere." "What do you mean?" "What do I mean?" "I mean she's fucking dead." Khalid put 2 fingers against Amina's neck, searching for a pulse he wouldn't find. His hand was shaking. "This wasn't supposed to happen," he said, to no one in particular. "She wasn't supposed to fight. They never fight once they're here. They're too scared, too isolated. Why did she fight?" "Because she understood," a voice in his head answered, though he tried to push it away. "Because she was smarter than the others, because she saw through it faster, because she chose death over whatever you had planned for her." The man on the phone was getting instructions, nodding, his face pale. He hung up and looked at Khalid. "Bassem says we stage it as an accident. Clean up anything that suggests she was restrained or forced. Make it look like she fell on her own. Maybe she was drinking. Maybe she slipped. We dumped the body somewhere else, somewhere that doesn't trace back to you. We're in a hotel, Khalid said, his voice flat. There are cameras everywhere, security, other guests. How exactly do we move a dead body out of the Atlantis without being seen? The second man was pacing now, running his hands through his hair. We can't leave her here either. If they find her in your wedding suite, if they start investigating, they'll find the paperwork, the marriage certificate. Everything leads directly back to you, to us, to the whole operation. Khalid stood up slowly, his expensive shoes now stained with Amina's blood. He was thinking, calculating, trying to find an angle that salvaged the situation. We say she fell. That part's true. We were celebrating our wedding. She had champagne. She's not used to drinking. She got dizzy and fell. Tragic accident. We were in the other room. We didn't see it happen. We came back and found her like this. Except she's been dead for what, 5 minutes now? Why didn't we call for help immediately? Why are we standing here planning a story instead of screaming for an ambulance? Because we panicked. Because it happened so fast. Because we're in shock. Khalid was warming to the narrative now, building it in real time. I'll call down in a minute. I'll say I just found her. I went out to take a business call. They'll have footage of me leaving. That works in our favor, and when I came back, she was on the floor. I tried to revive her. That explains any forensic evidence on her body, any disturbance of the scene. The bigger man was shaking his head. What about us? How do you explain 2 random men in your wedding suite? You're not here. You leave now before I make the call. Use the service elevator. Avoid the cameras in the main hallways. I'll handle this alone. And if they ask questions you can't answer, if they find something we missed. Khalid looked down at Amina's body, at the girl who'd smiled at him through phone screens for months, who'd believed every lie he told, who'd trusted him enough to leave everything she knew. They won't, he said quietly. She's nobody. A foreign bride who fell on her wedding night. Tragic, but simple. They'll investigate briefly, find nothing suspicious, close the case. That's how these things work when the victim has no power, no connections, no one here to fight for them. He was wrong about that last part, though he didn't know it yet. Back in Casablanca, Amina's mother had woken from an uneasy sleep with a feeling she couldn't name, a mother's intuition screaming that something was terribly wrong. She'd tried calling Amina's phone, got no answer, tried again and again, until finally she called Sarah, Amina's cousin, the one who'd voiced concerns from the beginning. Sarah tried Amina's number too, nothing. She tried messaging on Instagram, on WhatsApp, everywhere she could think of, no response. She went back through Khalid's profile, studied it more carefully now with concern sharpening her attention. The photos were real, but something felt curated, careful, no tags from other people, no casual snapshots. Everything looked professional, staged. She reverse image searched his profile photo and found nothing, which could mean it was genuine or could mean he'd been careful about creating a false identity from scratch. She called the Moroccan embassy in Dubai, explained that her cousin had just moved there for marriage and now wasn't responding to messages. The person who answered was polite but unhelpful. A day of silence wasn't unusual. The cousin was probably busy, enjoying her honeymoon, settling into her new life. Give it more time. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that time was something they didn't have. In the hotel suite, Khalid had sent the 2 men away and was preparing to make the call that would bring authorities into the room. He'd wiped down anything they'd touched, checked his story one more time in his head. He needed to seem shocked, devastated, a grieving husband who'd lost his bride in a horrible accident hours after saying their vows. He looked at Amina one last time before he picked up the phone. Her face was peaceful despite the violence of her death, like she was sleeping. She looked younger than 21, vulnerable, small. For a moment, he felt something almost like regret, almost like guilt. Then he remembered the money he'd already received, the deposit from the buyers who'd been waiting for her delivery, the complex web of logistics he'd built his life around. The moment passed. He called the front desk, his voice carefully calibrated to sound panicked. "I need help, please, my wife. She's fallen. She's not breathing. Please send someone immediately. Room 1547. Please hurry." The response was swift. Hotel security, then paramedics, then police. They found exactly what Khalid knew. They'd find a young woman dead from blunt force trauma to the head, blood and roses and champagne. The debris of celebration turned to tragedy. Khalid played his part perfectly. The shocked husband, the man trying to understand how joy became grief so quickly. He gave his statement in broken sentences, like trauma had fragmented his ability to speak clearly. He said he'd stepped out briefly for a work call, maybe 20 minutes. When he returned, she was on the floor. He tried to wake her, to help her, but she was already gone. The initial investigation was cursory. The scene matched his story. The champagne, her unfamiliarity with alcohol, the coffee table positioned exactly where impact would occur if someone stumbled. No signs of struggle beyond what you'd expect from someone trying to catch themselves while falling. No obvious inconsistencies, but there was one investigator, a woman named Lieutenant Rashida Al-Mazroui, who'd worked enough domestic cases to know that obvious wasn't the same as true. She noticed small things. The way the suitcase had been moved from where housekeeping said they'd placed it. The fact that Amina's phone was missing, Khalid said she must have misplaced it. He didn't know where it was. The bruising on Amina's wrist that seemed slightly older than the head trauma, like they'd happened earlier in the evening. And there was the champagne itself. 2 glasses poured, only one with lipstick marks, only one showing any sign of having been consumed. For a couple celebrating their wedding, supposedly drinking together, it was odd. Lieutenant Al-Mazroui requested Amina's phone records, her email, her social media access. She wanted to see the conversation history between Amina and Khalid, wanted to understand the relationship that had brought this young woman from Morocco to Dubai so quickly. But accessing a dead person's digital life required permissions, required time, required bureaucratic processes that moved slowly. While she waited, she ran background on Khalid Mansouri. His business checked out on the surface. Import-export, legitimate papers, tax records that showed significant income. But when she dug deeper, she found irregularities, shipments that didn't quite match their declared contents, business partners with criminal records, connections to known trafficking networks operating between North Africa and the Gulf states. She brought her concerns to her supervisor, who told her she was seeing patterns where none existed. An accident was an accident. The husband was cooperating fully. There was no evidence of foul play. Don't waste department resources chasing conspiracy theories when they had real crimes to investigate. But Lieutenant Al-Mazroui had daughters. She looked at Amina's photos, at the hopeful smile in her social media posts, at the life barely begun and already ended, and she couldn't let it go. She requested the hotel security footage, all of it, from every camera on the 15th floor and in the lobby. The footage showed Khalid leaving the suite at 10:47 p.m., returning at 1:52 a.m. Over 3 hours, not the 20 minutes he'd claimed. It showed 2 men entering the suite at 1:48 a.m., 4 minutes before Khalid's return. It showed those same men leaving at 2:03 a.m., using the service elevator, moving quickly, looking nervous. When confronted with this evidence, Khalid's story started to crumble. He admitted the men had been there, but said they were business associates. They'd arrived after Amina was already dead. He'd panicked and asked them to leave before calling authorities. A mistake, yes, but not a crime. He was in shock. He wasn't thinking clearly. The lieutenant pressed harder. Who were these men? What were their names? Why would he call business associates instead of an ambulance when he found his wife dead? Khalid lawyered up, stopped talking, but he'd already made enough mistakes. The forensic team, now looking more carefully, found fibers under Amina's fingernails that didn't match anything in the suite. They found a small bruise on her mouth, consistent with a hand being pressed over it. They found her phone in the trash bin 3 floors down, wiped clean but with recoverable data in its memory. The data told the story. Amina's final internet searches, conducted hours before her death, signs of human trafficking, how to escape locked room, Moroccan embassy Dubai emergency contact. Searches that didn't match the narrative of a happy bride accidentally falling. They recovered messages too, from the months of courtship, the careful grooming, the promises and gifts. But they also recovered deleted messages from Khalid's phone, communications with the men who'd been in the suite, with others in the network. Messages that used words like merchandise and delivery and buyers. Messages that made it clear Amina wasn't a bride, she was a commodity. Khalid was arrested on June 25th, 2 days after Amina's death, at the airport with a one-way ticket to Beirut. In his carry-on, they found Amina's passport, plus passports belonging to 3 other young women. In his phone, they found a network that stretched across borders, a business built on broken dreams and false promises. Under interrogation, facing overwhelming evidence, parts of his story emerged. The operation had been running for years. They targeted women from North Africa, from South Asia, from Eastern Europe, women who wanted more, who dreamed bigger, who could be convinced that love and opportunity were waiting for them in the Gulf. The recruitment was always the same. Careful courtship online, gifts and attention and promises. Marriage was the cover. the legal mechanism that moved women across borders and stripped them of their support systems. Once the women arrived, once they were documented as wives, once they were isolated and vulnerable, the reality revealed itself. Some were forced into domestic servitude, kept as unpaid labor in wealthy households, their passports held, their movements controlled. Others were sold to different networks, trafficked into worse situations than the recruiters ever explicitly described. The marriage documents made them legal, made them documented, made them easier to control and harder to save. Amina was supposed to be delivered to a family in Abu Dhabi, wealthy clients who'd paid handsomely for a young, educated, presentable woman to care for their elderly parents and disabled son. She would have been paid nothing, allowed no contact with home, trapped in a situation she couldn't escape. The wedding was just theater, the romance just bait. But Amina had figured it out faster than most, had fought when she was supposed to submit, had chosen risk over compliance, and in that choice, in that moment of resistance, she'd died. Not because Khalid wanted her dead she was worthless, but because dead was what happened when women fought back against men who'd spent months convincing them not to. The investigation expanded. Khalid gave up names to reduce his sentence. The network started to unravel. They found 12 other women, some who'd been missing for years, some whose families had given up hope of ever seeing them again. They arrested 17 people across 4 countries. It made international news, the kind of story that gets shared with warnings attached. The parents send to daughters with messages like, "Be careful who you trust online." Back in Casablanca, Amina's mother received the news in pieces, and phone calls, and official notifications, and eventually a visit from embassy representatives who tried to explain how her daughter's fairy tale had become a nightmare. They returned Amina's body. They returned her belongings. They returned everything except her life, her future, her chance to become whoever she might have been. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people who'd never met her, but who saw in her story a warning, a tragedy, a reminder of how easily dreams could be weaponized. Her friends came, her family came, even strangers came, women who'd had similar messages, similar offers, who'd said no, or gotten lucky, or simply hadn't yet said yes. They came to mourn Amina and to acknowledge their own narrow escapes. Sarah spoke at the funeral, her voice breaking but determined. She talked about Amina's kindness, her dreams, her desire for more than the life she was born into. She talked about how normal those desires were, how understandable, how human. And she talked about how that normalcy, that desire for connection and possibility, was being used as a weapon against women every single day. Amina didn't die because she was foolish, Sarah said. She died because someone took her hope and her trust and her dreams and used them to hurt her. She died because wanting more is treated like a weakness instead of what it is proof that we're alive, that we're human, that we refuse to accept that our lives at 21 are as big as they'll ever get. Lieutenant Al-Mazrui attended the funeral too, though she stood at the back and didn't introduce herself. She'd seen too many cases like this, women who fell through cracks, whose deaths got written off as accidents or suicides or unfortunate circumstances. She'd fought for Amina when others said to let it go, and she'd won. But winning didn't bring the girl back. It didn't undo the months of manipulation or the terror of her final hours or the violence of her death. What it did do was create a record. A case file that would be studied, referenced, used to train other investigators to look harder, question more, recognize patterns. Amina's death would help save other women, not because tragedy should be required to create change, but because sometimes it's the only thing that forces people to pay attention. Khalid Mansouri was sentenced to 25 years in prison. The others in the network received similar sentences. The families who'd purchased women were charged as accomplices. The lawyers who'd facilitated the fraudulent marriages were disbarred and prosecuted. The operation was dismantled, though everyone involved knew that other networks would rise to take its place, that the demand for vulnerable women would create new supply chains, new recruitment strategies, new tragedies. Amina's social media accounts remained active for months after her death. Her final post still visible, a photo of herself smiling in front of her suitcase, caption reading, "Dubai bound. New life starts now." People commented for weeks, unaware she was already gone, congratulating her, asking how married life was treating her, saying they were jealous of her adventure. Eventually, someone who knew the truth commented with the news, and the tone of the messages changed. Condolences, warnings, anger at a world that could allow such a thing to happen. Her mother kept Amina's room exactly as she'd left it, the envelope of savings under the mattress, still there, the photos on the wall of places she'd never see, the modest dreams that had seemed so small but that, in retrospect, had been exactly enough. The space became a shrine and a reminder, visited by women from the neighborhood who wanted to pay respects, or by mothers who wanted to reinforce to their daughters the importance of caution, of suspicion, of questioning offers that seemed too good to be true. But the real memorial was quieter, more personal. It was in the conversations that happened after Amina's story spread, the women who reconsidered the messages in their DMs, who asked more questions before booking plane tickets, who listened to the doubt in their gut instead of explaining it away. The families who looked more carefully at the men courting their daughters, who demanded meetings and references and proof of legitimacy before approving marriages. The investigators who took reports more seriously when women went missing, who pushed harder against narratives of accidents and suicides, who fought bureaucracy and indifference to find truth. Amina Ben Ali died in a luxury hotel suite in Dubai on June 23rd, her wedding night, her dreams still bright enough to have blinded her to danger. She died believing in love and possibility and the promise of more. She died fighting, refusing compliance, choosing risk over submission. She died alone, 21 years old, in a room decorated for celebration. But her story didn't die with her. It lived in the women who said no, who questioned, who survived. It lived in the systems that slowly, grudgingly began to change. It lived in the understanding that dreams are powerful things, beautiful and necessary and dangerous when placed in the wrong hands. In a luxury hotel room in Dubai, surrounded by roses meant for celebration, a young woman's dream didn't just die. It was murdered by the very promise that lured her there. And in the space between the life she imagined and the death she met, lies a truth we're all afraid to face, that sometimes the person who promises to save us is the one we most need saving from. That wanting more isn't weakness, but the predators who exploit that wanting are everywhere, patient and practiced and waiting. That love can be faked, but danger is always real. That being careful isn't paranoia, and caution isn't cowardice, and questioning offers of paradise isn't evidence of a cynical heart, but of a wise one. Amina deserved better. She deserved the life she dreamed of, the love she believed in, the future she was promised. What she got instead was a warning written in blood, a story that ends in silence, a reminder that the world is full of people who see hope as opportunity and dreams as doorways to exploitation. Remember her name. Remember her story. Remember that she was real and young and full of possibility, and that she died because someone decided her dreams were worth less than their profit. Remember, and maybe the next Amina will see the danger before it's too late. Maybe the next one will survive. That's the only memorial that matters. The living ones, the ones who make it home,